So I wanted to talk about process because one of the things I love so much about your work, have always loved about your work, is the intimacy that you feel immediately when you experience, whether it's a drawing or one of the tableaus or an installation. It's that not only do you feel the person that is in front of you, but you feel the aura of a life lived, whether it's the objects that have clearly been used and labored and had a life unto themselves, but also you're like the way you draw and your touch and all of you that's in every one of those drawings. Like all of it layers into this incredibly intimate and moving. I know, I love your work. That's right. So I wanted to talk about all of these aspects to begin with. And I wanted to start with the drawing because I feel like that is very particularly intimate in what you're doing. So why drawing? You did paint and you moved to drawing and are now exclusively of installation. There are other things, I know. But 2D, shall we say, like you don't paint, you draw. Can we do that? Can I say that?
No.
Okay, then I'm gonna let you talk.
Well, I'm mostly known for my drawings on various surfaces, but I do paint. I mean, I have painted. I studied painting primarily in college, in art school. But the reason I work with these dry materials, such as charcoal, is because I like the immediacy. I like the rawness of the marking. And then I like being able to manipulate those markings with my fingers and with my touch. You know, and my fingers get raw sometimes when I'm blending, but they have these blending stumps and things that you can use to blend the charcoal, particularly when I'm working on wood. Now, what you were saying about the the way that you wanted to know about my process and how when you look at these faces or installations that you can see further beyond the surface. That started when I was, that's something that I've been searching for personally as an artist since I was a sophomore in college, and I'll tell you why. I started drawing. I started enjoying making art when I was about 2 years old, and I drew all over the walls in my parents' house, and they didn't scold me or anything. They just washed the walls, and my mother's an educator, and my father is artistic. He was an artistic person, and so they didn't want to damage my creative instincts, and so I enjoyed drawing all throughout my childhood, and I decided to do it very seriously when I was 13. And I haven't really looked back since then. And I became very good at drawing from life, meaning, from something that's sitting in front of me, and also from drawing from photographs. And when I was in college, I had a teacher, a professor that I used to spar with, because at that time, the super realist movement was going on.
Yeah.
And all of my professors were abstract painters,
Yeah.
you know, and they wanted to see that super realism, you know. They wanted to trash that. They wanted to discourage people from working figuratively, I felt. And so I challenged this one professor as to why are you not asking the abstract painters in the class to work figuratively. You're asking me
Yeah.
to let go of figuration and to let go of the skill. So the conversation went on for a semester. But what I remember that really changed my thinking was that she asked me, what is it that makes the Mona Lisa so memorable? You know, that it's like the most famous painting in the world. Is it super realistic? Is it, you know, is there something tangible that you can point to? Is it her beauty as opposed to someone else? You know, why this one? And the answer is, we don't know, you see. And so she opened my eyes to the fact that there has to be that intangible something that you can't put your finger on in each of your works. Because if that something isn't there, the piece is not going to move people. So my job as an artist is, with each piece I do, is to not stop until I've reached the place where I feel like I've touched that intangible thing. And when does it happen? I don't know. Like the moment that it happens, I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly how to make it happen. But once it's happened, I feel a sort of release,
Yeah.
you know, and I feel a certain kind of satisfaction, like giving. I don't know if this is appropriate, but giving birth to a child, and you know, looking and saying, "Wow,
Ooh,
what a."
that's done. Because that was my experience.
But saying, you know, wow, what a wonderful addition to my family, you know. So that that quality that you were telling me affects you so much is what I search for in each of my works. And it makes me feel great to hear when people realize that that's what draws them in. And that it's not just the skill, like I'm this magical person who's talented. I mean, it took a long time to develop that natural drawing skill to the place where I could do that.
Yeah.
But it also took many years for me to develop the intuition and the je ne sais quoi to make that connection,
Yeah.
to touch. You know?
It's interesting.
What I do.
Janine Sequoia. The translation was Janine Sequoia for je ne sais quoi. See?
Okay.
Okay, let's simmer down. Okay, so it was interesting though because during the installation, I saw a similar thing happen too because you would lean forward a lot in your seat and you would be like super engaged with the placement or the discussion around whatever the room or situation was. And then there would be this moment where you're sort of just perched and there was this, and all 10 of us would just be like, waiting. And then you would kind of like take it all in, and then we'd see you kind of relax. And it was just so fascinating to watch that even these pieces that some of these pieces are from the late 80s and, 90s and the aughts, and they're not new pieces for you. Mm-hmm. And yet every time you encountered them in the space, it was like you were experiencing them completely anew, like you hadn't even made them. Like it was, and first of all, that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. I mean, to have that discovery and joy every time you come across your work. Were we reading that correctly? Is that actually your experience when you see the work she made? Oh my God, Julia, I'm sorry. Julia keeps recalling this wonderful moment where you were looking at one of your drawings and you went, that is a great work. And you were genuinely just like marveling at how much you had accomplished. And so I just wanted to ask you about that. Like, what is your experience? I told you mine. What is your experience when you look at your works?
Well, I've done a lot of work over the years. And I admit, sometimes I look at things and I'm amazed that I did it, I don't exactly remember working on these pieces. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I can look at a piece and feel surprised that I did it. I mean, the reality is that I'm just like, sort of like a vessel, and the muses get in there and I lift my hands and whatever it is that I'm doing, somehow I come out of it and I've done something that's new. Like I've given birth to something that's an addition, another piece that I think succeeds as best that I can make it succeed. And there are pieces that never get finished. There are pieces that sit in the studio, and I will walk by it for years, and then one day I'll see like a vase or a pot, and I'll pick it up and I'll, it's just, it's a mystery how it works, And I remember going into the gallery D.C. Moore and not knowing that one of my pieces was up on the wall. And I was like stunned, because yes, I made it, but I wasn't prepared for it, Yeah. And it's kind of like looking in the mirror and seeing a part of yourself that you hadn't seen.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that she was right behind me when I said that piece was so. But at that moment, I did look. I looked at the woman's this part of her face,
Yeah.
and I was like, wow, look at how it's just alive here, and it was like a part of your face that you don't think, everybody's like, oh, the eyes follow you, but and I love the process. I love the inspiration. I love the process, and it's always a pleasure to know when pieces are out in the world and people are reacting positively, you know, being somehow touched.
I wanted to ask you about the objects in the work. When we had an interview earlier in the week, Amy Carlton asked you about the first time you placed an object in the piece. And I wasn't sure, you started talking about cut, and I wasn't sure if that...
No.
So, thank you, because I was wondering about that. Might as well ask it in front of all these people.
Right.
But can you talk about the first time that you realized the objects?
Well, the first time I realized the connection, and that the pieces, which are like boards with a drawing on it, being combined with an object. When you put the two things together, you get something new. You get another formula, you know. The first time I remember that happening was way back in the 1980s. There was some piece that I had done on paper of these people dancing, and there was a head, like a sculpture of a head, nearby. I've always been a collector, even before I started, you know, using the objects. And I held the head up to the drawing, and it just brought the drawing and the head, they just came to life. They popped each other off. It felt like that object took on a whole new meaning, and the drawing took on a new meaning. And I didn't do it because I was afraid. Well, I'm not afraid. I realized that I would have storage issues.
Do you have storage issues?
Do I?
I'm looking at forefront.
Oh my gosh, do I have storage issues?
Do you have storage?
How many storage spaces do I have? That should be the question.
Do you have?
And so then there was another time when I had a party, and the next day there were balloons all over the floor, and the colors of the balloons were in the drawing that was on the wall. And it just felt like I should combine this and let it happen. And then finally I just started doing it, and I came alive, the work came alive, and you know, I was not afraid of the storage.
Or you found out you could rent storage in New York City?
Well, also I found out that some people would be interested in taking these things, and you know, that they might get something positive out of it, you know? I mean, really, that's what we want, you know? The thing is finding your best self as an artist, finding out your best strength. And, you know, sometimes you may try a hairstyle or something, and you know, you don't want to go there, and then 5 years later, you just feel like, wow, I should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah.
You know, but I waited until I was ready.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
And how do you find, like, when you see something in your travels, or do you buy things that are specifically for future work or for your home collection? And do they sometimes transfer spaces? We kind of talked about this in the gallery.
Well, you know, first I have to mention that I started flea marketing with my grandmother when I was a kid. She loved going to the outdoor flea markets in New Jersey. And she also loved stuff. She had whatnot shelves all over. And so I had an appreciation for little things and big things, different types of furniture. And she was the side of the family from the South Carolina. So there was a certain aesthetic that she had, which I think made an impression on me. And so before I started working with the objects, I would I decorate. I buy things and I place them. My grandmother always had she'd have something very simple, something kitschy sometimes, and she'd put it the way she placed it on the windowsill, and then she'd have two little things next to them. It just made you appreciate the little things and what she saw in the little things and how those things made her home feel cozy and comfortable, So I had that going on. And I traveled to all over Europe, and then forget it, Morocco and Mexico and Indonesia. I have a house full of art.
Yeah.
And also I trade works with, I have traded artworks with people. I don't have any space now to put anything else up. But I made a decision back quite several years ago that I would not buy for the house anymore. I would only buy for my work.
Huh.
So if I go to an antique shop, I'm not going to buy anything to put on the dresser. I'm going to buy it for the work. And I might not have a specific use for it. I might have a specific idea that it evokes for me, but I will, if I think that it's evocative enough for me to want to buy it, I will buy it and I'll put it. Like I have bins with, knives and what do you call them? Clothespins.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's
Like
terrible.
clothespins? Because you don't even use
Twigs. I have used. You haven't seen the ones with clothespins.
No, I haven't seen the ones with clothespins.
Oh man, I've done a lot of works, and this show probably is like maybe a third of what I've done. But that was the promise that I made to myself. But then if I go to a place like Egypt or Australia, if I go someplace really different, all bets are off.
So let's talk about when you go to a new place. And we have two installations in the exhibition. So we have Visitation, the Richmond Project, and we have Deep River. And when we were talking about the sort of genesis of those installations, you said when you arrived in those places, Deep River is Chattanooga, Visitation is Richmond, Virginia, you said that you arrived in those towns with nothing. You showed no ideas, no objects, you just showed up. In my mind, that's terrifying in a lot of ways. Wonderfully open too, right? Like there's no pressure on you because you're in discovery phase, and that's amazing.
But there's a lot of pressure.
But there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about that process.
The pressure is that you gotta do something that is creative, and it might be difficult. It might be like, pushing the boundaries or breaking someone's rules, but that's the kind of pressure that fuels me, It's a good kind of pressure. And I think most artists who are good artists, whatever, have a lot of like butterflies when they're entering into a new area. But if you didn't, what would be the payoff of doing it,
Yeah. No stakes.
Yeah, I went to Cuba. I didn't know anything about Cuba, but I went there not knowing what I would do. And as I took in the space and I took in the people and what was available and what the history was, and also the similarities, everything came together, and I just have to trust that. And I do trust that. I look forward to it. I look forward to the challenge. It's like looking for the beast to slay.
Is there a moment where you start panicking that you haven't found the lair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so far, I have found that eventually something. See, I believe in the muses. I believe in, this magical thing. It's like the intangible. You can't put your finger on it. You can't go in there and say, I want to do X, Y, and Z. So please get me some dirt and some old shoes. And, I'd like to walk in and discover those things.
Yeah.
And so for me, the challenge and the wonder and the excitement of it is bringing these elements together and creating, And when you were saying that, like you saw me sitting and thinking, sometimes it's like sometimes there can be an object or a situation in an installation that is just not working. This is not the right tablecloth, or this is not the right picture. And you can't just settle for whatever you can get. Because if I feel that it looks phony or awkward, I can't expect other people to be able to, to get it or feel it. So I have certain standards, and also placements are very important. I may ask people, okay, could you move it over 7 inches? Okay, now move it over another 1.5 inches. And, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but when it's in the right spot, it's in the right spot. If it's in the wrong spot, it's bad for the piece.
Every time you did that, it was, oh my God, it was so beautiful. Every time you did that, Che would be standing in the back, who's our chief installer. He'd be standing in the back, like, kind of like shifting back and forth, looking from different perspectives, and he'd just go, yeah, it's better. Yeah, he was right. I don't know why we even questioned. It's like, it's perfect.
I had, back years ago, I did a piece which was purchased by the Whitney Museum. It's of 3 men, like 1940s suits and fedoras or whatever, that kind of era. And they're posing like 3 guys, cool guys. And then there is a box with shoe shine.
Yeah.
Okay. The piece is called Shine.
Yeah.
So I had an assistant who was really awesome back then, and I asked him to make a plan, a layout, or a map of it, which he did. And I don't know, the piece went out and it never came back, thank goodness. It found its way to the Whitney. And when the first time the Whitney displayed the piece, they had the panel with these three men here on the wall, and the box was all the way across the room.
Really?
I was horrified. No, there were like people there viewing the installation, but it just seemed like, what's the connection between, let's look at the photos of it, right?
Yeah. So they thought it was like a Robert Gober piece.
I
where
don't
it just
know.
could
I
be
don't
anywhere.
know what they thought.
Yeah.
I have no idea what they were thinking, but I made it clear that I had to come in and put and give them the official way to install it.
Yeah.
I can't really expect someone. I mean, I would expect that you would notice from the photograph that it belongs closer, but apparently they didn't. And people could walk through with their friends, just walk and not even know that box was there. So I went in. I did not have, I had long forgotten about that map that my assistant had done. I went in and I spent about a half an hour, 40 minutes moving this and I told the registrar, put it at 10 inches. And I told her the dimensions from this side and that side. And so she put it all in her computer. At some point in going through papers and files, I found the map. And it was 10 inches.
Oh my God.
You see?
See, you were always right.
If it had been 12 inches,
Yeah.
I would have come in and I would have said, oh, you got to push it back a little. It's too far, Or if it had been, it's just, I think that the space between the object and the panel is alive, you see.
It is.
So it's, there are these things that we just don't think about until you have to be very specific in placements. And but I have friends who have had worse stories about their works being installed the wrong way. So we try to keep very good plans.
Do you call people and you'd be like, hey, I see your piece is up at Moment. Oof. You need to get down here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did want to touch on a couple of things, as I mentioned, that are specific to, that might be of interest to this audience. And you mentioned your grandmother being from South Carolina. It was funny. I actually want to ask you about this too. So Kate Larkin from DC Moore Gallery, and I just have to say, oh my God, DC Moore Gallery. You guys have been amazing. You've been supportive from day one that we got involved. You and Bridget Moore, who's the head of DC Moore, have just sent pieces when we needed them, have been here the whole time to help with install. I cannot thank you guys enough for your support. This show would not have gone the way it did had you not been here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But that's not why I brought up Kate. So Kate and I went shopping at Sleepy Poet, which was awesome. Oh my God, it was so much fun. And we really fell down a rabbit hole shopping for you. And I'm sorry, because I gave you a gift, and now that you're saying that you don't want anything for your home, I'm worried that we shouldn't be giving you stuff. But, okay, good. But, so everything we picked up, Kate and I were talking about, like, oh, Whitfield would love this. Oh my gosh, I can totally see this. I totally forgot why I was telling this story. There was a reason. Oh,
But I do like gifts.
Okay. Good, because there are more coming at dinner. But it was so, because I was thinking in terms of like, there was one point when we were talking about, you were looking for a vase, and you were talking about this would be something that you would see in a home of a black family that had this for generations. And so when Kate and I were walking around Sleepy Poet, like we kept talking about that element. And so the piece that, one of the vases we sent you, or picture that we sent you, it was a transfer print. And when Kate and I were talking, I was like, so this is something that a family would have that couldn't necessarily afford like a hand-painted piece of porcelain or, you know, like something from Meissen, but it's evocative of that. And when we sent it, you said, oh, that's like something my grandmother would have, and I get it, but not that one. So is that something that you think about, like those heirlooms and the way, the things that your grandmother collected, and do you shy away from that because it is too close and too personal, and instead you're thinking about the relational elements? You know, you talked about how she would bring things alive by putting them in a relation to each other. Or are there elements of the South Carolina life that migrated with your family to New York City that you want to keep alive? And Whitfield did come down to South Carolina over the summers and spent time here in the Carolinas, so it wasn't just what you saw in the homes.
Right. I spent a lot of time every summer when I was a child with my grandfather. Would make a road trip to go home, as he called it, and I experienced different kinds of spaces. I can say that sometimes there's just a feeling about an object that you know, when you go to buy a gift, you think, oh, well, I bet you Kate would like this, you know?
Yeah.
But what is it about it, this that makes you think about Kate, you know? Doesn't mean she's gonna like it, but it's just, you know, that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about because I've seen a lot of spaces, you know, and the things that people have in their homes tell a lot about who they are, you know, and tell a lot about what's important to them. As a very young child, I had to have been 5 or under. My mother took me to an older woman's apartment, and she had these big, cushiony sofas, you know, like the sofa and the armchairs. And she covered every surface of the armchairs with doilies, you know? And I remember that it looked so peculiar because it was like the back of the sofa, she made them, and she'd make the back, a really huge round one and lay it across the back of the sofa, and then she'd make one to lay across the arms. And of course she had those things on the tables, and you know,
The runners
and of course, because they were so decorative, and we didn't have anything, we didn't have a lot of things like that in our home. It looked very odd, but my grandmother, I discovered, had she crocheted, but not with this thick white thread. She used very thin, fine red or and she embroidered like a fringe around handkerchiefs.
Yeah.
So I have like a stack of them, that my grandmother embroidered. And so I've been to a lot of spaces. I've also, I don't forget, my father's family was from Barbados, and their aesthetic was quite different. They liked things that were glittery, like chandeliers, sort of, how would I say, maybe like, as in contrast to my mom's people, the Bajans had like a sort of European nouveau riche kind of aesthetic, and so those spaces informed a lot, and the kinds of colors they chose, and I remember there was a lot. My mother and I had a lot of discussions about the kinds of colors that my aunt had in her house. It was like, one side of the family likes, light blue and green, and this other side likes purple and, metallic
Orange.
silver. Yeah.
But there's some
Well, not
rolls
orange.
when
It was pink and purple. Those were two things that, my aunt's favorite color combinations. And so, in my home, I guess you would say it was a kind of a combination of the two.
I wanted to also ask you about Nina Simone, who is a beloved daughter of North Carolina and very important to you. And one of the things, there's a lot of writing about your relationship with Nina Simone. You can talk about that too. But one of the things that I found out spending these last weeks with you was that there's a Nina Simone song that got you through most challenging moments in your life, whether that's applying for school or something else. And I also want to thank Harvey Cummings for doing that beautiful rendition of Damballa earlier. So to recognize that. So can you talk maybe a little bit about Nina Simone? And that's going to be my last question, then we'll open it up to the audience.
Well, when my mom had a lot of, my parents had a lot of jazz records, but they also had, like Broadway musicals and vocals. And there was one Nina Simone album. My older sister and I used to go through the albums and play them on our little, portable piano,
Yeah, record player.
Yeah. Excuse me. And the album that my mom had of Nina's was Nina Simone Sings Duke Ellington. My sister and I thought it was we used to laugh at her because we thought she sounded like a man, And she had a song called Merry Mending, which I don't know much about I'm assuming that Duke Ellington wrote the lyrics. I don't know, but this is it's a very different song for Duke Ellington. It's like a ditty. And now when someone's had an operation or they're, not feeling well, I will send them that song just to cheer them up. But aside from that, we didn't listen to her. We didn't have access to her as kids so much. In the 60s, when the movement, the racial issues started coming up, she had a song called Young, Gifted, and Black, which was popular. And I didn't, I didn't start listening to her, like really listening to her until I was 17. And I went to college in Baltimore.
I'm sorry, I just heard her singing the song Baltimore when you said that. And I'm sorry, but continue.
I went to college in Baltimore, and I had a lot of experiences that were very profound and very, like earth-shaking and, personal things. And I revisited Nina's music because it was emotional, it was gutsy, and whatever you want to say about the quality of her voice in technical terms, there was a beauty to her use of her instrument, and there was a special beauty and poignancy to her message. All right, now that the freshman year was a challenge for me, and I decided I wanted to go back to New York because New York was where I came from, and I felt that there was a better place for me to study art, and I had already been exposed to a lot of art because I went to the Arts High School in New York and museum studies, and so that spring, after going through my period of, soul searching, Nina Simone had done she had fled the country, and she went through a lot of changes. She lived in Liberia and Barbados and Amsterdam. But then she released a new album that came out that spring when I was packing to go move back to New York. Guess what the title of the album was?
What was it?
Baltimore.
Oh, it was the Baltimore. I love that album.
Yeah.
I love that album. I love that song.
Well, one of the things about that, I think that Nina and I always felt that Nina and I had a connection, like a spiritual connection. And what was so magical to me was that I was leaving Baltimore after having been through a difficult time there. And here she's singing this song, I'm never gonna go back there till the day I die. So I do go back to Baltimore. I like Baltimore now, but at that time I didn't. I didn't like the freshman year. It was a difficult transition for a kid from the Bronx being there. And so about a year later, she came back to the U.S., and I got to meet her. And every time that she played in New York, I would go and talk to her backstage. And so she was a very special person for me. And, you know, and people say, you know, people think that, you know, like, well, what other artists do you like? What other artists? Sometimes it could be someone who's, it could be a poet that feeds a visual artist the most. And in Nina's case, it was her music. And also, you know, there are a lot of visual artists who like listen to Coltrane and they say that their work is all about jazz, and people are like, yeah, right. So my work has a rhythm that is very similar to Nina's. And she was easy enough to get along with for me, but I saw her in some of her moments, you know.